Hello, everybody. Welcome to another Zoom call where we're gonna work on answering your questions. We only had a few questions come in, so if you can think of anything to ask, now would be the time to do that. Hope everybody's having a good fall and getting ready for Thanksgiving and planning some good family times. So feel free to chat in any questions you have. We'll jump right in it and get started. I received my cheek swab results for supplements, but you did not mention any dietary changes. Maybe I didn't ask, or driver change, which I'm fairly sure I did ask. Um, if I if I didn't mention any dietary changes or driver change, then it didn't come up. So the only time I'll mention something is when I'm testing and it comes up, and that's the same thing with the right frequency update. I think that's the second part of this question. Also, I'll send you any RIFE updates via email, Dropbox, or flash drive, or since you didn't mention anything about RIFE updates, perhaps you're happy with what I currently have. Yes. So there wasn't any RIFE updates that needed to be done. There wasn't any dietary changes or changes to the driver or the cancer. So if there was, then I mentioned that and I tweak your diet. I don't know. I could try to remember like percentage of time that happens. Like I guess I couldn't really put a percentage of time that happens. I do believe from a philosophical standpoint that cancer is always trying to change its fuel source and try to um, find another way to fuel itself and take off and start growing again. Maybe that's why. I mean, we don't see that all that often that actually happens with people that their cancer's taken off again. Thank the Lord for that. But that's typically when there's a dietary change and something else is driving that cancer, fueling that cancer. When a person is relatively stable with their cancer, usually there isn't a dietary change. Um, so if I don't mention it on the cheek swab, then it didn't come up. I always do check for it. Same thing with right frequency changes. Next question. I'll be traveling from Italy to the US. This is a person that lives overseas for 15 days. So far, I feel I am in remission from my estrogen-driven cancer. I sleep with my wife every night for no less than 7 hours. How detrimental will it be to be away from my wife for 15 days? I think when you're at the state that you're in, I know the person that asked this question, remember who asked the question, and when you're doing really well, and it's going to be a hassle to bring it with on a trip, um, because no, I don't think it's hard to travel with the rifle per se, but I don't. But when you're traveling overseas, it's just another thing to put in your suitcase. It's another thing to go through customs. It's another thing to deal with. Um, and it's a chance that it could get damaged. So whenever you travel with something, the suitcase could be jostled around. Things have a greater chance of, becoming damaged. So I would agree. I think you'd be just fine leaving it at home for the 2 weeks that you're in the US and enjoy your trip in the US. Probably feel weird sleeping without your wife machine, but I think you're just fine traveling without it. So at this point, I think you'd be just fine. Okay, my sodium levels, talking about blood sodium levels, have been low in the past few blood tests that I've had done. What causes low sodium, and what is the best way to get it back up again? Well, sodium ranges typically from normal lab test range. Remember, there's a difference between lab range and functional range, or what's called optimal range. So a lab range is typically wider, and a functional range is typically tighter. So I think the lab range for sodium is like 135 to 145 or 146. The functional range is a little bit tighter, 137 to 142 or 143, depending on who you ask. Um, if they're low, what causes low sodium? Well, first of all, sodium isn't one of your electrolytes, so it maintains the osmotic pressure in your blood. Um, it helps maintain an acid-base balance. Sodium functions in cells, in muscle contraction. It functions in your nerves, in the impulse transmission. If your sodium is too low, it can affect your heart. Um, and the question is, what causes low sodium? So, common cause of low sodium would be adrenal fatigue. That's a very common cause of low sodium. I wouldn't say it's the most common. Probably the most common is taking diuretics. So I don't remember who asked this question, but the question you'd have to ask is, are you taking diuretics? So if you're taking diuretics to get um, to get water off your body, then that can decrease your sodium levels. If you're not taking diuretics and you have edema, so if you have a lot of swelling in your legs, that can cause low sodium levels in your blood. So, um, but probably the most common is taking diuretics. Um, and more serious issues with low sodium would be what's called Addison's disease. Addison's disease is a disease of the adrenal glands where it impairs your resorption of sodium. Sodium is supposed to be resorbed from a hormone that's released by the adrenal glands. It's then resorbed in the kidneys and retained, and you'll get excess spillage of sodium into your urine with Addison's disease. Um, but common would be taking diuretics. Another common would be edema, and then another common would be adrenal fatigue. So, if a person that are a lot of stress and they have adrenal fatigue, well, how else would you measure if it's adrenal fatigue? Then doing a Dutch test, or if you don't want to spend the money on a Dutch test for maybe $150, you could do an adrenal cortisol test where you do a saliva sample, uh, 4 times in a day. I think it's right before bed, right when you wake up in the morning, at noon, and then in the afternoon. And then you measure your cortisol curve. That's also done in the Dutch test as well, but that will tell you really the how your adrenals are doing. The reason why I like the Dutch test is it's also testing for DHEA, which is also a hormone that's released by the adrenals. So if a person has adrenal fatigue, they're going to have a flattened curve of their cortisol curve. They'll have low DHEA, um, and then that will relate to the low sodium levels. Now, of course, if you're on diuretics, you'd have to go. I'd look at drug interaction first. That'd be the most common. If you're not on diuretics and you don't have edema, then it's most likely adrenal fatigue. So, and if you don't, if whoever asked this question, um, is that, oh, I'm not on diuretics, I don't have edema, um, then I would support this. And you don't want to do a test for your adrenals. You could support your adrenals by taking adaptogens and taking some electrolytes. So how would you treat it? So always you treat something by fixing the cause first. So if I have low sodium levels, you don't just jump right in and go, okay, I'm just going to take more electrolytes and I'm going to eat more salt. Because it could be because you're excreting this, not because you don't have enough sodium. So you want to find that cause. But if you said, no, I'm not on any diuretics, no, I don't have edema, then it's most likely adrenal insufficiency, and then you'd support that by taking adaptogens or some adrenal tissue to help support your adrenals, and then to take electrolytes. You could take an electrolyte powder, An electrolyte powder is going to be sodium chloride and some other minerals in it. Um, Most mineral supplements aren't going to have a lot of sodium. I've had people with low sodium when they get to this is just that um, they're that they start taking just putting salty in their food a little bit more. Now you got to be careful of that because sodium chloride, just adding salt to your food, maybe a person has low sodium because they have adrenal fatigue. And like you made a comment here, maybe because you're doing saunas every day, um, then and most likely adrenal fatigue. And then you say, uh, uh, well, I'm just going to add salt to my diet. You have to be careful because if you've gone through the autoimmune course at all, in the last part of the autoimmune course, I think it's the last module is a course on Hashimoto's. People with Hashimoto's can have a salt sensitivity, and that can flare their autoimmune disease. It's not super common, but it's not that uncommon either. So you do have to be aware of that with using just sodium chloride. If you have to increase your sodium by adding more sodium chloride, then you do have to take more potassium. And I do have I think I have a whole video on that in the autoimmune course. So also look at that. Also, you got to look at some people are salt sensitive and that sodium causes blood pressure changes. It's only a percentage of people that that happens to, but just be aware of that. If you do have a blood pressure cuff at home, make sure you monitor that. So if you're going to take an electrolyte with sodium or you're just going to increase salt consumption, I would suggest, that you do check your blood pressure, unless the person's 20 years old. I'm not so worried about that. But if you're over 50, you should probably be checking your blood pressure with that as well. Um, yeah, and I don't know if I went over any blood. Whoever asked this question, I don't remember who. I guess it was you, Bobby, because you're the one making these comments on the chat, or Debbie making these comments on the chat. That I don't remember if I went over your blood work with you because whenever you look at your blood work, you don't look at numbers solely individually. You look at how they relate to other things, and there's different patterns that flow. Now sodium is one of those that's easy to answer the question because it isn't as quite related to other markers in your CBC or complete metabolic panel. So the answers that I gave you are pretty straightforward. So if you're not on any drug diuretics, you don't have any signs of edema, then you got to think of adrenal insufficiency as the cause. Could you lose a lot of electrolytes doing the sauna? It depends on how much a person sweats. Depends on how long you're doing the sauna. Um, yes, you will lose electrolytes sweating, but still you should have a balance of that. But also if a person's on a very low sodium diet for other reasons, or they just don't like salt or they don't drink a lot of salt. Typically, people that's one of the signs of adrenal insufficiency that they crave salt. So, it's one of the telltale signs. I start to crave salty food. Then you got to think of it should, at least should be a red flag for as a practitioner to go, I wonder if this person has adrenal insufficiency. And doing a cortisol test, an adrenal stress test, it's called, is something that should be discussed at least. Uh, okay, that's all the questions we had come in. Here's some questions from the chat. I did a CA score test. I think you're talking about a cancer marker test. The left anterior descending uh, is 27. The rest is all zero. Should I take nattokinase or low? You're talking about a heart test. Um, uh, should I take nattokinase or lumbrokinase? How much? Thanks. So if you have any blockage in your vessels, I would suggest the clear circulation. It has both nattokinase and lumbrokinase in it. Um, and can't remember everything else that it has in it. It has some other chelators in there for vasculature. The clear circulation, I would use that product and just take one or two a day. Sodium question. Next question. By Bobby, I have bone spurs in my cervical spine with some narrowing between some of the vertebrae. Would it be beneficial to run bone regeneration or bone spurs on the Rife machine? Yes, absolutely. That's the way really I want you guys to be thinking. Everybody on this call has a Rife machine. I think you should use the Rife machine. It should be your first go-to. Even with heart issues, there's heart blockage programs. There's on your machine. Those are good things to run. We've seen just some miracles using the Rife machine for all sorts of weird things. So that should be your first go-to thing. Now, how much is it going to help? I don't know. Think of also running the accelerated healing program. It's in the normalizing frequency program. That's a favorite of mine for any musculoskeletal issues. When having bone spurs in the cervical spine with some narrowing between some of the vertebrae uh, is, let's say, I was going to say it's common, but I think it'd be more fair to say is that it's literally everybody has that at a certain age. So don't be, overly concerned about that. Um, Anybody that's, done any contact sports probably has that going on by the time they're 40. Everybody else has it's called degenerative disc disease and degenerative joint disease. That's called osteoarthritis, those bone spurs. And it is, I would say, if you took a sampling of 100 people off the street that had absolutely no neck pain and took x-rays of them, I would say that 98% of them, if anybody's over 30 years old, I mentioned 98% of them, you'd have some of that going on. Now, if it's causing more symptom patterns, I would say go to a chiropractor and make sure that that chiropractor knows that you have a history of cancer so that they're not doing heavy manual adjustments on you. In my opinion, anybody with cancer should be going to a chiropractor that does either a some gentle technique or activator technique, because you don't want to have a pathological fracture. So and you can't see if there's metastasis to bone via an X-ray unless you already have over 50% bone loss. You won't be able to see it on an X-ray. So don't trust that a chiropractor says, well, I took an X-ray of you and everything looks good. Your bones look really good. So I'm going to do this manual adjustment on you. Even though you have a history of, breast cancer and, there's no, you didn't haven't had a PET scan lately to show that there's metastasis. So we took an X-ray and you're safe to go. No, you're not safe to go. You'd have to have over 50% loss of bone density in the bone for it to be visible on a plain view X-ray. So make sure that you go to a chiropractor that's doing a low force or a no force technique like activator. What's the downside of high phosphorus and what is the reason? Um, I think you're talking about phosphorus in the blood. Is that what you're talking about? And you're talking about phosphorus as a marker in the blood, not alkaline phosphatase. So there's a difference there, a complete difference there. So high phosphorus in the blood is usually going to be a sign if a person has high phosphorus in the blood. Let me see if you made a comment on that here a second. The calcium score. So, okay. So phosphorus in the blood does tie to calcium. So if you have elevated calcium and elevated phosphorus, then you're concerned with a little gland next to your thyroid called your parathyroid gland. So if a person has elevated calcium and elevated phosphorus, that is a key sign. Oh, so it's in hair analysis? Okay, then forget it. We're talking about something completely different. So I don't put a whole lot of value in hair analysis testing for phosphorus or calcium. So forget it. But if it was a blood test and it was elevated phosphorus and or elevated calcium, there's different things that you'd look at. If you had elevated phosphorus and elevated calcium, that's a pretty sure tell sign, even if a person has cancer, because if you have elevated calcium with cancer, that could be a sign of metastasis to bone and bony destruction. But if you have elevated phosphorus and elevated cancer, first thing you think of is parathyroid issues. So you could have parathyroid problems you'd want to investigate. But as far as phosphorus and calcium on a hair analysis, I don't even want to really comment on that. I don't think it's valid testing. Next question, debating whether to keep my colonoscopy scheduled for 11/25. I had scheduled several months ago when I was having GI issues with erratic bowel movements, twinges in my rectum, feeling like incomplete emptying and bloating. Issues have resolved except some bloating still. I'm wondering if I'm just inviting issues. Uh, if I do the procedure. What are usual indications that you need to get one done? The only reason I'm half inclined is because my Max insurance has been already paid. Also, my CEA and CA 2729 had those slight increases that I was told that I told you about last week, but I don't know if that means anything. Okay, so why would a person want to get a colonoscopy? And of course, from a medical, um, uh, the medical answer that you get a colonoscopy to rule out any colon cancer, any polyps that are growing, any uh, any in-pocketing of your colon, out-pocketing of your colon, any inflammation in your colon. Uh, there's all sorts of things that will rule out and rule in and give diagnoses by doing a colonoscopy. So in that sense, they're great to do. Personally, I've never had a colonoscopy, and I don't feel like I'm ever going to get a colonoscopy. So, is that the right thing to do? I can't say that's the right thing to do for everybody. We have patients that may be listening to this that were diagnosed with cancer because they did their routine colonoscopy. And if they didn't do it, they may have never caught it early enough, and it was a lifesaver for them. And we've had patients that regretted doing the colonoscopy. So it's really a difficult call. If you feel led to do the colonoscopy, by all means, I think you should do it. Um, if you feel like there's reasons for it. And from a medical standpoint, if I was a medical doctor, I would say the reason for doing a colonoscopy is that you're over 50. Everybody over 50 is supposed to get a colonoscopy. Well, I'm over 60. I still haven't had a colonoscopy, and I don't plan to do it, but that's just me. So, but I think there's benefits. You go to a good GI doctor, and I don't think, I know you hear some horror stories of colonoscopy, but I think that's like one in 100,000 or something like. So I don't think you have to worry necessarily about that. I joined at 4:03. Did you answer my first question about? Yes, sorry, I did. Yes, I did. Diet. If I didn't put diet or driver or change or right frequency change on your cheek swab email, then there is nothing showed up. So just stay the same, stay the course. When I've run the liver function program on the Rife, it makes me feel weird. Should this concern me or should I keep doing it? Um, so typically, I would say that if you run a program on the Rife and you feel anything, like you feel a tingling, you feel weird, you feel pain, you feel worse, you feel better, you feel, I think that's indication that you probably need those frequencies. So I would do it more often. So if I ran a particular program and boy, I just felt it like right at, the whatever, then I would do that program again. So that to me is you talk about good pain, bad pain, good feeling, bad feeling. I think any feeling when you run frequencies, then you should do that. Doesn't mean that if you don't get anything off, you don't feel anything that you should not do it. You have to use wisdom. You're running your cancer frequencies for your cancer. It doesn't make me feel any different. Well, I'm going to keep doing it. But if I'm running something specifically for, you know, a headache and it makes my head buzz like weirdly when I run it, I probably need that frequency, so I would do it. How bad is my chance for lymphedema if I take out two or three more lymph nodes? That would make 7 to 8 out total in the left armpit. Trying to decide if I should stay on the hormonal suppressing drugs and do no surgery or do the surgery and the drugs. Yeah, it's really difficult because we've had patients that have had 30 lymph nodes out and seemingly, at least all the years we've spoken with them, seemingly have no issues with lymphedema. And then we've had patients that have gotten just a few lymph nodes out and can't get rid of the swelling in their arms. I had one patient. Of course, she was elderly and she's passed away. She was in her late 80s at the time, but she was a little spark plug. And I think she only had one axillary lymph node taken out. And my gosh, her daughter could not get the swelling down in her arm. She had to wear these tight bandages and had to bandage her arm up, and it was just horrific. So everybody's different on how their lymph system is able to drain and how much edema that they have. You do have to think long term too, because I know this gal, I think it was years before that she came to us that she actually had that surgery. Um, and as you age, you might have other comorbidities that are causing edema, different imbalances in electrolytes and different you know, issues with your liver and your kidneys and your adrenal glands that you're not expelling water correctly, and and then that's when it might come back and haunt you, so that you're retaining more water, and now it's more difficult to get rid of it. So it's a difficult question to answer. I wish I could say, oh, if you only get this many out, you're going to be fine. It's just not possible to give an honest assessment of that. I'm hearing about alternating sauna with cold. Yuck to cold, but any benefits in alternating sauna with cold pack directly over a breast lump? I think I could handle that if it was a direct cold instead of a cold water bath, I think you're saying. Um, Absolutely. So cryotherapy or cold therapy can be extremely beneficial. So, um, the truth is some people do really, so here's the deal. So most people are doing a sauna to help with detoxification. So they're doing a sauna to help them utilize their skin as a portal of detoxification. Um, they're not really doing a sauna to raise core body temperature because it's really pretty difficult to raise core body temperature with a sauna. Um, and um, but the idea of cryotherapy is to decrease inflammation. So um, even with doing physical therapy on an injury, okay, there's huge benefits to creating a pumping action of alternating hot and cold in any given session. So you have an injury to a leg muscle, you're going to ice it. then you're going to put heat on it for 5 minutes, and you can put ice for 5 minutes, and you put heat on it for 5 minutes and put ice on it for 5 minutes to get a pumping action through the tissue. Some people do real well with that, but I will tell you, just through experience in helping people with musculoskeletal issues, some people do real poorly with any of these, meaning any of the three. What I just described, alternating hot and cold, 5 minutes hot, 5 minutes cold, 5 minutes hot. Number two would be just heat therapy. Number three would be just ice therapy, cryotherapy. Some people do real well with cryotherapy, and it decreases inflammation and it can really help an issue. Some people end up with reactive hyperthermia after cryotherapy. So they don't do well with ice. Um, and some people do real well with heat, and some people, heat causes just a greater amount of inflammation and worse problems. So um, that's just the mixed bag of how we're different. Everybody's different, how your blood vessels are. So you just got to try things. So I wouldn't be hesitant to, hey, I'm gonna do a sauna, help sweat, and then maybe put an ice pack over my breast tumor and see how that reacts. See how I react to that. Give it a try. Like Debbie just said, what do you think about jumping in a cold shower after a sauna? Hey, I know the Finns used to take a sauna, and of course the Finns don't call it a sauna, it's a sauna. Okay, you're in Minnesota, you learned how to pronounce things the Finnish way. So you take a sauna and then you go roll around in the snow out in your outdoor sauna. That's how you took a bath. So that was common. The Finns basically used a sauna or a bathhouse. They didn't have baths. They just did a sauna. And then they'd roll around in the snow and it would clean. That's how they would clean themselves. They didn't take a shower. So yes, you could do those things. So I don't think it's too much of a shock for a cancer patient. I'm not saying you have to go roll around in the snow, and I'm not even saying you have to go take a cold shower, but even try and put any ice on your body in different spots, whether you're over your cancer or over your liver. Try some different things like that to get a pumping action. And you might respond real well to it. You might go, oh my gosh, I think that made it worse. It hurts. And I don't think that was good. Okay, then don't do that. And again, try something different. So the truth is, I think every person's body is different. How your vessels are going to react is different. And that's really what it is how your vessels react. So, um, but give it a try. I think it's safe to give that a try for sure. Any other questions? I think that was the last question there. I could have sworn I read that the alternating hot cold helps increase blood vessels, and that's the opposite of what we want for cancer. It doesn't increase blood vessel growth. So what you don't want with cancer is vessel growth. That's what happens when you use nitric oxide. That's what happens um, with endothelial growth factor. Heat and cold don't influence endothelial growth factor. So you won't have to worry about that with cancer. Anything else? All right. All right. You guys have a blessed week and don't hesitate to reach out if you're having anything going on. We're here for you. So I did add a bunch more stuff to some of the courses, so I don't know if anybody's looking at those. Um, And certainly with the question about sodium, whoever asked that, if you want to go over your labs in more detail, just call and schedule an appointment or self-schedule. All right. Love you all. Bye-bye.